Two grumpy critics.
I'm going to get all documentary up in here.
All right.
Yeah, because I watched 3 hours worth of documentary in the form of a 2-part series on HBO called Elvis Presley, The Searcher.
All right.
Yes. Now,
this is when Elvis Presley had a hobby where he was going around beaches with a metal detector.
He was geocaching, actually. Nobody knew that. That's where he was for years. Been geocaching.
I found my first cache. And then Elvis would say.
Exactly. Now, full disclosure, I am not the world's biggest Elvis fan.
Right.
Never really was. Now, as a lad, when I was, in my very formative music years, age 4, 5, and 6, right around in there, when I was listening to my mom's 45s on my Mickey Mouse record player, among those 45s was an assortment of Elvis classics. You had Hound Dog, you had Love Me Cruel, you had all of his hits from early in his career, and I quite enjoyed them. Mm-hmm. But from that point on, really, Elvis really did nothing that I could relate to. I grew up listening to rock and roll and all throughout the 70s. And while Elvis was recording and even performing in the 70s, his music wasn't really relevant to pop culture. It wasn't being played on the radio. Right. He sort of just existed in his own little world, doing his American trilogy and things like that on stage. So he never really impacted me growing up. I knew the old songs, and that's really about it. And of course, I wasn't a big fan of Elvis's movies. Mm-hmm. Because I just certainly wasn't the target audience. So I didn't know a whole lot about Elvis. I mean, I knew about his early days. I knew a little bit about his movie career, all the cheesy movies that he made. I knew a little bit about the 68 comeback special, which was a huge hit on TV. Although I didn't even really know why it was called a comeback special. I didn't know why Elvis was coming back and where he went. So again, not a big Elvis fan, didn't know a whole lot about him. Of course, I know that he died just a few feet from the commode unceremoniously for a king.
Yes, indeed.
But that's pretty much it. So I sat down. This wasn't really appointment viewing for me. Honestly, I just sat down at the TV and was flipping channels and caught this at the very beginning. I thought, I'll watch a few minutes of this and see what it's like. Well, 3 hours later, I hadn't moved. Because I was so wrapped up in this documentary. This documentary is so well produced. Kudos to the writers, kudos to the directors, kudos to all who participated. It is done like a documentary should be. There's no fake footage. There's no fake sound effects. There's no fake. I mean, it is all just beautiful photography, great interviewees. All of the experts and the personalities who talk through this documentary are off camera. Yeah. So you don't have to worry about seeing somebody in an ill-fitting sweater vest sitting in front of a mahogany bookcase full of leather-bound editions trying to look impressive, saying, well, in 58 when he got out of the army. It's all everybody talking is off camera, and you're watching these rare photographs and film footage of Elvis and his family. And I mean, it's just captivating. And the cool thing is that aside from some of Elvis's former friends and some of his former bandmates, they also get comments from musicians, contemporary musicians like Emmylou Harris and Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty, folks who know a little bit about the music industry and who can speak to Elvis's career and his highlights and lowlights from a current perspective. I mean, these are stars, and they know a little bit about what Elvis went through in his life. Mm-hmm. And I just found it so fascinating. And the 68 special, the comeback, I learned that what he was coming back from was a complete absence from the music scene.
All right.
Colonel Parker is the much maligned and rightfully so antagonist in the story of Elvis Presley's life. I mean, he controlled him, he manipulated him. He was part of Elvis's success, no doubt, but he was also very manipulative, very controlling, and he kept Elvis pretty much inside a bubble. Mm-hmm. And it was because of him that Elvis kept having to do these god-awful movies over and over and over with these cheesy soundtracks. And, Elvis did like the idea of being a movie star, but he didn't like the idea of having to sing these horrible songs throughout these films. And really about the only good music that came out of his film career was Viva Las Vegas. And even that was Colonel Parker's most hated movie because it had such a good co-star, Anne Margaret, that it took just a modicum of attention off of Elvis, and Colonel Parker didn't like that. So he put the kibosh on any competing talent in Elvis movies.
Oh, I see.
But so while he was, in the years after getting back from the Army, for years he was just doing picture after picture, like 2 or 3 a year, I think. And in that time, he wasn't in the studio recording the music that he wanted to record. He wasn't making real music. He was doing horrible soundtracks, which didn't sell well. So that was the impetus for the '68 comeback. Is Elvis wanted to show the world that he could still rock and roll. I mean, so he started pulling out all these songs from the '50s to say, like, I'm still, a rock and rhythm and blues artist, and this is where my heart is. And so that gave more poignancy to that comeback special than I'd ever really known before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Colonel Parker was basically, he was a barker, a carnival barker. I mean, that's all he wanted was to sell merchandise and to sell Elvis. He did not have any of Elvis's interests at heart. I also learned there were so many tragic aspects of Elvis's career. Elvis, for years, wanted to tour overseas. He wanted to see Europe, and he wanted to see China and Japan. He wanted to go to all these places and tour, but Colonel Parker would not let him because Colonel Parker was not even an American citizen.
Oh, really?
And he was afraid that if he left the country, that he wouldn't be allowed back in.
Uh-huh.
Now, of course, he did admit that, but he would never let Elvis leave the country. And that was the impetus behind Elvis's famous Aloha from Hawaii satellite concert.
Right.
That was Colonel Parker's solution, is that he said, well, you can't tour around the world, but let's just do the satellite and broadcast it around the world.
Huh.
Which I also didn't know. So there's just so much about Elvis's life and career that I had no idea about. I didn't know about his stint in Vegas in the 70s, which was basically the beginning of the end of his life. I mean, he had a really hard time in Vegas dealing with those shows, and he was basically living in a hotel room, stuck there, isolated. And that's when he really started doing the uppers and the downers, the former to get him up to do a concert, and the latter to get him down after a concert so he could sleep. And then he toured like a madman at the end of his life. I mean, he was just doing over 100, sometimes 200 shows a year. And I had no idea. But anyway, the documentary is very captivating. It one of the things it really does is it spotlights Elvis's love of music, and that's something that I never really got before. I saw, other than early in his career, his big hits. Later on, by the time I was old enough to be listening to the music on the radio and absorbing new music, I basically saw Elvis as kind of a karaoke artist.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. He was unapologetic about not writing his own songs. He never had any interest in it.
Yeah.
But when you see Aloha from Hawaii and stuff like that, I mean, I just thought, okay, he's doing karaoke in front of a big band. I mean, he was living off of his past successes, which he kind of was. But how he got there is heartbreaking, and it made him more of a sympathetic character to me as opposed to the caricature that I grew up with. And so, I can't recommend this documentary enough. I mean, if somebody like me who's just a tangential Elvis fan or appreciator, I think a real Elvis fan and or anybody who likes music and is just and really likes the history of music and likes the blues and gospel and all these roots that Elvis came from. I think you'd love this as well. I couldn't pull away from it. So I give it 5 peanut butter and banana sandwiches out of 5.
A Radio 6 international production from the USA. Copyright 2018.